Hello and welcome to GM Tips. This is GM Rick here coming at you post-election several days. So hope everybody's doing okay. I hope everybody is safe and doing well and getting back into the geekery. I know change is always a tumultuous time for anybody. And some changes can be really positive. Some can be perceived as, oh Lord, the world's ending. It just depends on your point of view and where you're coming from. And today's topic I'm going to talk a little bit about is trying new things out. In other words, experiencing new races. And one of them is going to be the gnome. And why did I pick the gnome? The gnome, I think, is one of the more, I guess, misunderstood and made fun of races in all of the things outside of maybe a halfling. There are some other ones that are made fun of, but the gnome takes the brunt of all the jokes in RPG, for sure. And again, for those of you wanting to do sci-fi, again, the more modern-esque ones, unless you're looking at a steampunk type of setting, I am sheerly focusing right now on fantasy races. And so it's going to apply more to Dungeons and Dragons. It's going to apply to Dungeon World. It's going to apply to things like Pathfinder and Pure Steam. So these are where these different races are going to show up the most. There are going to be other fantasy games that they may be included in as well. But those are the four I'm really going to focus around today. I do want to say one thing at the beginning, and I think it has to be said in my opinion. And again, I normally try to leave a lot of stuff out of my videos, so please bear with me and at least listen for a minute or two to what I have to say before I get into the races. Speaking of race, one of the things that I think is often misunderstood is, and I'm going to lay it out, because I am a European blooded white American, we are often seen as we don't understand the plights of LGBTQs. We don't see the plights of different other races like Black America, Hispanic America, Asian America, Polynesian America. I could go through the different litanies. Middle Eastern Americans. We are seen as, gee, you're the people in power and favor, so you have no clue what I'm going through right now. And if you voted for a candidate other than Democrat, you are my enemy. And that's sad, folks. I will say this, stereotyping, just like stereotyping of Gnome and different races in a game. No one likes to be stereotyped. You don't like to be stereotyped as the person you are. You don't like the slurs, you don't like the denigration, you don't like the negativity, you don't like people telling you what you're like and how you are and what you are and saying and excusing it, forgive me, with the, well, uh, whine a little bit. I've suffered X years of this. You don't have that right to you're suffering a little discomfort today. So, I suffered discomfort all my life. So deal with it. And my ancestors before me. Folks, do you not see by doing that to a white American, you are no different than the white American doing it to you? I have been slurred as, look, he does the white boy dance. I've been slurred as, oh, gee, yeah, his family's rich. Obviously, people didn't know me who threw that one on me. Obviously, he's a Republican and a right-wing nutbag. I'm a centrist, thank you. Please don't insult me and call me a Republican. Please don't insult me and call me a Democrat. And again, I'm not saying that because I'm negative of either party, but you're insulting me by inferring I'm one or the other instead of getting to know me. Um, Folks, don't do that to each other. Please don't do that to each other. Not every white person thinks they're better than you, okay? Not every Christian person thinks that they have the right to slander somebody in the LGBTQ community and hate them for their sexuality. Not all of us think that way, okay? Just because we vote for a certain candidate doesn't make us the devil incarnate, all right? There's a reason why we chose one candidate over another, and it may not be reasons that you assume. Yes, it will affect you, as all elections do. Let's face it, when President Barack Obama became president, I was affected. My taxes went up, my jobs went away. I was laid off for 8 months from a job because of the way the market was under his presidency. Do I blame him for everything? No, it's the way the world goes sometimes. When you elect somebody, there's going to be goods and bads with them, okay? But hopefully overall for your country, that president does the right things. And this idea, he's not my president, yes, he is. Just like she would have been my president, okay? This idea that because you don't like a candidate, they're not your president, that is a 2-year-old, okay? Basically whining about their toy that they don't get to get because you took it away from them, their favorite toy. Come on, folks. Let's be better than this, okay? And I'm just going to say this. The only way this gets better over the next 4 years is if all of us have the mindset, you know what? I'm going to be a learner. I'm going to learn about this man. I'm not going to listen to what the media had to say. I'm not going to listen to what Mrs. Clinton had to say about him. I'm not going to listen to what even I've seen about him on shows. I'm going to be a student of him and see what he does. And also, I'm going to get involved with his White House. I am going to try to find ways through groups to get with his White House to sit down and better understand our position so that we get a better and hopefully a better shake in things by that. Don't assume that Mike Pence, just because he was a governor and did what he did, is going to always be that way. That's like me assuming that of politicians I've had. I was fortunately surprised by Annie Richards as governor of my state and in Texas, and I loved her. Even though she was a liberal Democrat, she was a wonderful, wonderful governor. Didn't agree with everything she did, but I loved her as a governor. And, you know, probably more than I loved Bush. Bush was an okay governor. He wasn't a great governor, but he was an okay one. Some of you would say, no, he was great. It's opinions, folks. We all have opinions. Don't slur and say something. Don't keep using the excuse, I'm white, because you're slurring me just as bad as you get slurred. Let's throw off the monikers. I know what color of skin you have. I know your race. I know your background, but I'm not going to assume anything about you. I want to get to know you. I want to get to know who you are. What if you're a black trans American? Is that the same as a black straight American? No. What if you are a black evolutionist American or a black Wiccan American? Are you the same as a black Christian American? No, not at all. And even among black Christian Americans, are you the same? No, not at all. How about Hispanics? A Catholic Hispanic, are we all the same? No. Come from different countries? No, very different. I would never want to excuse somebody and call them Mexican when they're Puerto Rican. That is a huge insult because the cultures are way different, way different. And yes, folks, I was fortunate to have traveled the world some and gotten to know different cultures. I had an aunt that taught me, seek to understand. I had a coworker that reminded me, seek to be a learner. Both great lessons. I don't ever assume I have all the answers, folks. I may debate with you, I may go over things with you, but I don't ever assume I have all the answers and that I understand everybody's plight. I don't. And until I've walked a mile in your shoes. And yes, have I been bullied for being white? Yes. Have I been bullied for being a geek? Yes. Have I stood up against bullies? Yes. Have I befriended bullies later on when I knocked them on their rear end or at least stood up to them? Yes. Did they change? Yes. Folks, not everything is as static as you'd like to be and as labeled as you'd like to be. Is my best friend a former Catholic Jewish, now agnostic? Yes. And I love him. He's got one of the funniest, and he is as far left liberal as you get, and I love him to death. And he cracks me up. Is one of my best friends growing up, black and was Republican, served in the 82nd Airborne, and then turned more towards the liberal Democrat. Yes. Is one of my other friends a black American who is Muslim, who served in the military, who I bounced with as a bouncer? Yeah, a bouncer. Go figure that. Yes. So please do me one favor. And I know I've taken a little bit of this video to do this. Don't stereotype each other. Or don't stereotype gnomes. And we're leading into the gnomes now. So, you know, for those of you that have put up with about 7 minutes of rant with me, I hope it says something to you and not in a bad way. The gnome. The misunderstood gnome. Everybody sees gnomes as these little garden gnomes. Let's face it. How many of you, the first time you thought about a gnome, you thought of the garden gnome? Or Gnomeo and Juliet? How many of you thought about that? Or how many thought about these little tricksy fey people that are just, you know, really craven and little and got these long white beards and these pointy hats. Yeah, I did too. Let's face it, when we all started out, we had our stereotype of the gnome. And the gnome wasn't a positive one. It's like, okay, he's not as strong as a half-orc. He's not as strong as a dwarf. He probably doesn't have the martial prowess of a dwarf. He is annoying. They just go on and on and on and on and never shut up. They make stupid comments and they're foolish. And all they do is run around and blow things up because they're so curious they don't know when to stop. Folks, that is not the gnome. Some gnomes are that way, but that's not the gnome. So let's take a look and do a fresh dive into a gnome. Clear your mind. I'm going to ask you right now, take a deep breath and clear your mind about the gnome. Anything that's going to stereotype in your mind, push it out. It's just like me growing up. I had stereotypes. My grandfather was a little racist Irishman, and I loved him. But he said so many racial slurs to everybody, including his own people. I had to push those slurs out of my mind throughout my young adult life, from about 12 to 17, because they would pop up when I got angry. And I would push them out of my mind because I said, you know what? That is not the way that person is. And for me to think that way is wrong. Please think that way the same way about the gnome. Don't, because some of you are going to already shut down and say, okay, I'm turning this off. Don't do that. Please sit through and at least listen to this and see if maybe I give you some insights that you didn't know about the gnome that is actually pretty cool. It's kind of like what Alex Agunas has said about the Kitsune and the Vishan, what is it, the Weyang. Don't automatically assume you know them until you get to know them. And also for the Samsarans, another race that's kind of interesting. So the gnome, and I'm going to look at this, and this is on the Gnomes of Gorlarian, if you want to look at the book. Now you can get it out of probably the D&D books will have their own versions, a little bit of the gnome and what they can do. So let me read a little bit about them. They do get a strong constitution. Gnomes have a very stout constitution, and in fact, in the game of Pathfinder, there's a chemical called pesh that's made from on the southern continent that gives you amazing insight and abilities. It's like taking the buds off of a cactus in the desert and eating one. Kind of that kind of insight. Clears the mind and takes you to another plane. The gnome can do this, and because of their constitution, they suffer no permanent ill effects from that drug, or most drugs. Amazing, huh? Pretty kind of interesting about a gnome that you can try some things with them that you couldn't try otherwise. They also have a +2 charisma. They are very charismatic. Now, they're not always tricksy. The charisma can be for diplomacy. It can be for bluff. It can be for a lot of different skills that are charisma based. They don't always have to be the diplomat. They can be, but that's not necessarily what they have to be. And then, of course, as we know, because they are smaller, more diminutive people, their strength goes down. It's a -2 strength. You're not going to get a tank in a gnome. But you know what my gnome's war cry was when I played him? And this was Dorian Greywalker, one of my favorite gnomes that I've ever played in my life. And I've had many iterations of him. But in my D&D 3.0 and 3.5, it was fear the freaking gnome. Because he packed the punch of a sorcerer and a rogue. So you never knew what you were going to get on the receiving side from him. And he had his hooked hammer, and boy, he could use that hooked hammer. I took feats that made him a hooked hammer nut. And he also had power attack. Go figure, a gnome with power attack. So it was fear the freaking gnome.
This one is for you.
Thank you. Getting something sweet from Mini GM. Gotta love her. She always makes appearances. So don't assume because your strength is -2 that a gnome has to be weak. Yes, okay, they don't carry as much, but equipment for them, their equipment is half anyways of its weight. In some cases, 3/4 of its weight. So not bad penalties. They are slower. Again, small doesn't move as fast necessarily. But they do have the low light vision, which is good, like elves have. They have a low light vision. They don't have dark vision. They can take dark vision, and it is available in the inner sea races, which is another guide. So keep in mind there are variants of gnomes. You don't have to just take the lock, stock, and barrel one. You can switch out different sets of traits that they have with other traits. They get the defensive training. So I love this because that's the +4 dodge against giants. Now, not every gnome is trained that way. Some gnomes, you switch that out for a different ability. Maybe they're better against reptiles, or they're better against kobolds and those type of races, or they're better against another race, or they're better. You can swap out a lot flexibly, but this is the base stat trait things that I'm going through with them. They have a hatred. Gnomes normally hate reptilians and kobolds, but that's not always having to be the case. Sometimes that can be switched out for linguistics. Sometimes that can be switched out for inventiveness, as can the gnome magic. The gnome magic can be swapped out for linguistic skills or linguistic magic. So the gnomes can be quite the forgers and the interpreters too. They can be quite the fact machine, as we call them. A lot of people don't see gnomes that way. They see them as unwise, stupid, silly, and foolish. Oh no, some of my gnomes have been smarter than the wizards in the party with what I've run them. NPC. They have keen senses. They get a +2 on perception. They are very keen to catch things. Now, again, another thing that can be swapped out for other types of gnome abilities, and we'll talk a little more about that. They have illusion resistance. Again, part of their whole thing that they are illusionists and tricksters by nature as a standard stock, but they don't have to be. Why are they tricksters? And people have asked that. Gnomes in Pathfinder come from the first world. Now, not always true in every world and every universe. In the D&D universes in Faerun, they came from different places. But I love this background of the gnome the most. They came from the first world. What is the first world? It's the world of Fae. Fae is constantly changing. It is a fluid chaos of ever-changing traits. So keep in mind that things are ever-shifting, ever-changing with your gnomes in the world they were in. And they fled that world. And some people don't know why. Why did they flee that world? Well, they fled that first world because of some catastrophic event. They were immortal. In the first world, gnomes were as immortal as elves. I love that about them, too. And they kind of still are in the world of Golarion and the Inner Sea. They can be in other realms, too. You can follow this story. And I love this story and explanation a lot better because it gives strength to the gnome. What kills a gnome is repetition and stationary, same type of things day in and day out. So a gnome guard that never got anything new, that goes with the same caravan and sees nothing new, will get what's called the bleaching. A gnome that is a cook that never experiments and cooks anything different than what the trail boss wants them to do on a trail or at a restaurant, they start to get the bleaching. Gnomes must always be exploring, finding, developing, experiencing. It comes from the chaos of the first world. That's why they are so sucked into that, and it is such a part of them that when they try to change that and become routine and repetitive, it kills them. It sucks the life out of them. Now, can the bleaching be reversed? In some cases, yes, but they are permanently scarred by it, and it reduces their life. So normally the killer of a gnome, if it isn't a monster or a quest, is the bleaching, because they hate being thrown into that routine environment. So keep that in mind. That's where some of these different traits come from. They are obsessive. Gnomes are obsessive in their craft, and they can take craft, and the two things that it gives them is craft or profession. Now, they don't have to be alchemists. They don't have to be clockwork makers. It's what they've been in 3.5 and 3.0, and in some cases 5e when you go to Faerun. I don't know about Dungeon World. There may be something there as well that some of you guys who do that as well can comment in on the video itself. But keep in mind, they can pick any profession and get a +2 to it, or any craft and get a +2 to it. So it gives you a lot of diversity that the gnome, before in 3.5, it was always alchemy. They were the alchemists, the inventors. Not so in Golarion. And I love that about them. They've changed that up in Pathfinder in a good way. And then they have favored deities. And listen to these, because most of them are chaotic. Shelyn, Gozra, Desna, Caden, Kayleen, and then even things into the Dwarven or Gnome pantheon. Well, of course, their nature, coming from the first world, they could do a neutral good god or goddess. They could do a chaotic one. They are sure as heck not going to do a lawful one, because that means routine repetition to them. And they don't hate lawful, they just, for them, it's death. They can't. And so for them, it's hard to adhere to a law when they're constantly creating. I love the thing of how they go through the gnome society. And I think that's, more than anything else, that's a reason to get this, because they go through the gnome society and upbringing. They talk about the mindset and the exile and the culture. The fact that during birth and childhood, the children are rarely told what to do. They are allowed to explore their creativity. Unlike other families that are very rigid and you have rules, gnomes don't have that. To them, that's death, and they're not going to. So understand why a gnome is capricious. It is because that's what is their lifeblood. It's what keeps them vital and long living. If you take that away from a gnome, you kill the gnome. And that's one thing, guys. If you're going to play a lawful gnome, you're going to experience a bad experience unless it's in another setting or system that allows it. But even there, I would say you're doing yourself an injustice by doing that. Embrace the capriciousness. Gnomes come from Fae. That's originally where the first names and things of gnomes came out of, was the Fae of Germanic Fae and out of Celtic Fae. And that's where really the gnomes got their thing. They were brownies or gnomes. And so that's where the whole capricious Fae nature is. And the Fae was always capricious and ever-changing. Why? Because it was the environment around us. It was nature. And nature is capricious in that way. So keep that in mind. I love the illustrations. There's a gnome that's going through the bleaching. You can see the white hair. Gnomes love vibrant colors. You can see the blue hair there. It's kind of a bright light blue. They also have other ones in here that I love. The bald gnome. Gnomes are about change and difference, and they love to be different. Here's your red-haired gnome. So keep this in mind, that they have a lot of things with them. The gnome settlements, again, very fluid. They have some ones on the realm of Galarian, but they're very fluid realms. Now, there is a gnome god or goddess that is in there that they've talked about, that has come out. And so that's one of those things. Now, I love this gnome. The turquoise and purple. That is the epitome of a gnome. And always my gnomes, when I have them, have this different type of hair that is unique, because it's what is a trademark for them. They also, I love these guides because they give you where the gnome settlements are. And those settlements are fluid. The one I love the most is Gogpada. Gogpada is a little floating sea of seaweed, debris, and other things that they built a settlement on. And it floats and vacillates between Aveston, the continent of Aveston, the continent of Garand, and the continent of Arcadia. It floats back and forth. So they're always constantly moving and experiencing, and even riding the seas and storms. There's your epitome of your gnomes in that sense. So what are positive about gnomes? Well, gnomes have a lot of favored classes, and that's been added to with each book that's come out. I find these classes with gnomes, and we'll go back to traits and skills, but I want to give you some ideas of where I see gnomes being a real strength. Most people just stuff them in the rogue or the bard role because, hey, they're a little singer one, like Scanlan, the bard gnome, or Pike, the cleric of Sarenrae. So a cleric, a druid, a bard, or a rogue. And all of them are good classes, don't get me wrong. But they're pretty vanilla, okay, in what you're coming with. What else can they be? They can be alchemists. I know it's stereotype, but they are the inventor types. And not just a standard alchemist. They can be a clockwork alchemist. They can be a wizard working with clockworks. They love clockworks and other types of automations. They can also be a swashbuckler. I love the swashbuckler. It is a dexterity-based, finesse-based class that can bleed out into several different things. I think for them it's ideal. If you're going to have a fighting gnome, the two types I would look at are the rangers and the swashbucklers. Rangers, they can be a range combat type of gnome with bows, and again, great place to put them. And they're not going to do a lot of damage. I mean, let's face it, their weapons are going to do a D3 to a D6 at the highest. They're not going to be your bruiser that runs up into combat. But then you don't have to make them that way. They can dance in and out of combat and do damage as they go. You don't want them to be fluid. Now, they are harder to hit. Their armor class gets a better dodge to it because of their size modifiers. They're automatically harder to hit. And that's a good thing, especially the bigger the monster. So you're against a dragon. Boy, they're really hard to hit. The dragon has a hard time hitting a gnome. Gnomes are moving and dodging and darting, and they're just this little creature like a fly or a gnat that you're trying. You remember trying to kill a gnat? Pretty much that. They can't hit them. And that's the great part about them, is keep in mind those size modifiers and what they do to AC, because it gives you a real advantage over a lot of other creatures other than the medium size. Medium size, you don't get a huge advantage. Large and above, you do, and you are tough to hit. Okay? I love them in an investigator. The Gnome Investigator to me, and again, it's a Pathfinder class that's convertible to D&D 5e and also to Dungeon World. The Investigator is greatness. Here's why. The Investigator, you get a lot of knowledge skills. You get perks and inspiration that you can use towards that to boost it. So extra D6 rolls and other things that go to those knowledge to make you that much wiser when what you're coming up against and figuring things out. They get to do the studied strikes. Investigators, if they take a full round studying one opponent, and they must do it with each new opponent they go to, that first round they don't get the extra modifiers that they would as a rogue to backstabbing. It's their version of backstab, but it's studied strike. And basically what it's doing is saying, I'm watching you, and I'm looking for chinks in your armor and your form. And I can automatically, with my analytics, tell me where those are. And every time I strike you there, I get modifiers. And that's what you're doing with your dice modifier. So I love it. And then you hit them, and you don't have to flank. That's the key. With an investigator, see, with a rogue, you've got to flank. You've got to have somebody else in that combat with you, or a condition that allows you to flank your opponent to get your extra dice 6 of damage. Not so with an investigator. You study one opponent, and you get that. Now, going after another opponent and not studying them, you don't get that. It's kind of the drawback, like you get with the rogue if you're not flanking. You're studying and figuring out. So really look at the investigator, because I believe, in my mind, there's a lot you can do with the investigator. You can do a standard empirical type. You can do your undead slayers, or you can do your steel hounds. I love the steel hounds because they get amateur gunslinger abilities. So they get the gun crafter and gunslinger abilities. And so you don't have to become a full-on gunslinger. But as an investigator, you can get the gunslinger things. So I love that. I love the idea they can use a sword cane. So your opponent, when they're going up against an investigator, they have a cane. You have a walking cane. They underestimate you. You draw your weapon and poke, poke, poke. Much easier for concealment, especially if you want to mix in some Vigilante, which another class, by the way, if you guys aren't using them in the other systems, the Vigilante's greatness. The Vigilante lets you become kind of a superhero or kind of a rogue or an evil arch-villain, but you've got your alter egos, which is your class, your standard class. So it's like your Vigilante and your alter ego. Love that, because there's a lot of confusion you throw into people with that, and a lot of perks to being a Vigilante. So keep that in mind. What are some other classes that I think are there? I think that Gnomes are also well suited for any of the occult classes, especially the... Mom's home. Okay, where is Mom? She's not home. She's gone. Yeah, she's gone, sweetie. Gotta love it. The mind of a 5-year-old trying to reason through it. So you guys get lots of mini GM moments. I like the occult classes, especially the mesmerist, the occultist, and the psychic. I think gnomes are very well suited for all three of these. And number 4, the kineticist. Love them in all these roles. Think they're just tremendous classes. I think the mesmerist aligns with their normal capricious trickster nature. And the things you can do with the mesmerist are pretty freaking amazing. It takes the illusionist on and puts it on steroids, because now you are the mentalist, as I call it. You are affecting people and how they act by you doing little subtle things and little subtle sayings and programming them. I love them because they're a pain in the rear end. They're not necessarily a combat machine, but they can make your life just literally miserable with what they can do and how they can program you. So keep that in mind. Now, I want to talk a little bit about some of the alternate racial things. And I'm going to hit a couple of these real quick. I'm going to go through the inner sea races and the race guide. First, I'm going to do the race guide, because the race guide has a pretty comprehensive thing on gnomes. So we're going to take a look at gnomes with alternate rules. So page 32 of this book. And I suggest, again, even if you guys in D&D 5e don't have this, get the PDF and use some of these, because there's some really good traits. I love traits. You guys don't like maybe complicating things. I've always loved traits. I don't see them as a complication. I see them as a part of that race. And they're things that they have built into them that make them uniquely different. So here's the different types they've got. They've got alternate rules. So you can do the academian. Really good for an investigator type gnome. The academian are more academically inclined than the rest of their kin, and they get a +2 on any single knowledge skill. So you pick one knowledge skill: knowledge local, knowledge knowledge arcana, knowledge religion, and you can put a +2 bonus, racial bonus, into that. Bond with the land. Some of them are much more of a nature land type of gnome. And those get a +2 dodge bonus on the AC on a specific terrain, and that replaces the defensive training and the hatred. So the +1 that you get versus reptiles and kobolds, it replaces, as well as a +4 defensive against giants. But again, it allows you to be better on certain terrains. So say you're in a winter adventure, and you want your character to have an advantage on ice and snow. This is where you get that from the armor class. So you're not losing and having to use equipment to get sure footing, because they already are sure footed on that terrain. Dark vision, that allows you to give up your low light vision and your perception keen senses to get dark vision, which I think is a great one to have. Eternal hope. These are confident in hopeless situations, and basically they get a +2 on saving throws against fear and despair. And once per day, after rolling a 1 on a d20, they can re-roll and take the second result. So it replaces defensive training, the +4, and the hatred. This is great if you want the lucky gnome. Good for a rogue in my mind, and good for any of those type of rogue classes, or monk. Well, you can't do a monk really with them, but rogue, barbarian, any of those type of classes. The ranger, you may want to use this over some of your defensive stuff. The explorer, they get a +2 on climb checks and 1 knowledge skill, and it gets rid of their hatred and obsessive traits that we talked about. Obsessive is their profession and or craft skill, where they get the +, and the hatred, of course, is the attack versus the kobolds and reptiles. Fell magic, I love the fell magic. It basically replaces the regular gnome magic, and you can do bleed, chill touch, detect poison, and touch of fatigue. And so it replaces that gnome magic. And there's several that do that. The other is the magical linguist, which gives you arcane mark, comprehend languages, message, and read magic. I like the gift of tongues. It basically gives you a +1 on bluff and diplomacy, and you get an extra language every time you take a linguistic rank. So it means you get 2 a level instead of 1, or every point you put in there. And so, not every level, but every point. It gets rid of defensive training and hatred, but if you want a non-combative one that knows things and can interpret and understand things really well, that's the way to go. Knack for poison. It replaces the illusion, resistance, and obsessive, but it gives you a +2 on fort saves against poison and a +2 craft alchemy with poisons. So you're the poisoner. The pyromaniac. I love the pyromaniac. That basically takes and replaces all your gnome magic with pyro stuff. So dancing lights, flare, prestidigitation, and produce flames. Your master tinkerer. I love this because it gives you a +1 on disable device and knowledge engineering to tinker and make things and understand things. And it replaces your defensive +4 AC against giants and your hatred, your +1 attack against your reptiles and your kobolds. And then finally, a Warden of Nature. You get a +2 AC against aberrations, oozes, and vermins, and a +1 on attacks. And that replaces your defensive training and your hatred. And especially if you're a gnome from like Keonan, the elven country, where Tree Razor, the evil demon, is constantly poisoning the forest, this gives you advantage on those type of situations. You love natural magic, you hate putridity and decay. It bothers you to no end. So again, those are some of those type of things. Now they've got different ones. They've got the dread gnomes, the gear gnomes, the lava gnomes, the traveler gnomes. So there's different types of gnomes they give you. There's also the Arctic gnomes that are in as well. And their favorite classes they give you are in Pathfinder are alchemist, barbarian, bard, cavalier, cleric, not so much, druid, fighter, a little bit, gunslinger, inquisitor, magus, monk, oracle, paladin, ranger, rogue, and sorcerer. Now, this didn't have the occult adventure of the vigilante in it, but those are the ones. Now, they do get different archetypes as well, with gunslingers and other type of things. So keep that in mind. They have some amazing archetypes. The one I like the most out of those is the prankster bard. That's kind of your Scanlan prankster bard. They have a whole thing around him. Or the saboteur with the alchemist, where he sabotages things. So there are some really interesting things here. Now, this also gives you some other ones. So with the gnomes on 82, one here, let's see if they give you the same old, same old. I don't think they do. Family, faith, life cycle. Oh, it gives you information on the bleaching, and I love that, as well as some of the different weapons that they have. It's not just the hooked hammer. They have some other types of things, the catcher and some other inventions they've come up with. Keep in mind, as you're doing a gnome, think outside the box. They're not going to be a tank for you. But what they will be is something unique and interesting. They can be an invaluable part of the party that doesn't always have to be the combatter, the up-in-your-face combatter. They can be a distant combatter. They can be a gun combatter. They can be an inventor who throws automatons against the monsters. They can come up with little spy automatons that can go into cracks and crevices and listen in on the enemy. They can be saboteurs and spies. They can be magical inventors. So if you need somebody to invent magic items and do different things, they're real good at enchanting as well as evoking. They have a lot of strengths, transmuting, conjuring. They can be your conjurer or your summoner that summons monsters. Like the Edelions, you'll see the gnome that they have in Pathfinder is an Edelion, has his Edelion, and he's a summoner. So there is a lot of different things you can do with the gnome. And they aren't blasé, and they're not a garden gnome, and they're not something to kick, and they're not something that's the mascot of the party. They are truly an invaluable thing. Every time I play my gnomes, they're very different, and they're very unique. They're often an invaluable part, whether they're a PC or an NPC of the party. And the parties come to expect me to throw gnomes at them. They love that I do, and they always get some interesting gnomes that are really helpful. I had a pirate gnome that I still use, and some of the people on Twitter who've joined me on a one-shot, two-shot have run into Flynn. Flynn Greywalker is your navigator, knowledgeable water guy, sure-footed on a boat, hard to kill on a boat. He is trickster, dive around, dodge, acrobat, climb the ropes, monkey, little gnome. And he is good at what he does. And he is wise often in his comments. He is never stationary. That's why he's on a ship. He's always going somewhere new and experiencing something new. So he is a wealth of knowledge and experiences. And he has a wicked sense of humor sometimes with his things. So keep those in mind, that gnomes have a wicked sense of humor. Their humor is not always appreciated by other races because it is a little bit on the wicked side. And for them, it's not necessarily evil. It's just how they are growing up in the world that they did in the first world. And they kept that coming into this world back in the ancient days. So keep that in mind. You can really incorporate that into your other systems. Now, I've given you a lot of Pathfinder slant on them. You can incorporate anything I've given you here to that, and it's really easy to do. You have to get some PDFs or go to the SRD. You can go to the Pathfinder SRD, which is free, and you can get that information, and it's really easy to do. Um, I think that's it, folks. I really appreciate it. Thank you for a little bit of the rant in the beginning. I just want you to know where I'm coming from, because I think so many of you have misjudged me sometimes on my Twitter and other places and Facebook. Get to know me just like I do you. I give you your opinion and your time. Don't assume anything, please. We're so easy to do that as a culture and as a people, and it's sad. We miss out on some great experiences by being that way sometimes, and sometimes protective because we've been burned. I had one friend tell me on Twitter, and I really appreciate it, and she is Black or African American in background, whichever. Different ones prefer different terms. I know. Um, she said the only white people I've ever known were mean and cruel to me. They were abusive and hurtful, and you're nothing like that. And I am lean a little bit conservative. I'm also religious. I'm a Christian, and I'm not going to lie to any of you. But I don't run around touting that you can't have same-sex marriage and love, and that you're evil or you're some vile creation because you think differently than me. I accept religion. I accept anything from pagan religion to Muslim religion of the Quran, Judaism, um, different types of other isms, from Taoism to Confucianism to crystals and New Age. I'm not going to judge you on who you are by your religion or faith. I'm going to be the person that gets to know you. Give me the chance. And that's why I love our community, because we do put away a lot of pretenses. But please, when I tell you what I am, don't automatically go to the stereotype. I don't. I've gone to bat, believe me. In the state of Texas, I have defended same-sex marriage and shamed quite a few of my fellow Christians for their attitudes. And I've told them how just utterly crass and callous they are. So don't automatically lump me in because I believe a certain way. I try to keep an open mind in the gaming, as a GM, as a person, as a friend, and I hope you do too. I hope that you come out of this next 4 years with so much positivity and goodness and just real life and love and great gaming experiences. And I pray that every day, with positivity and much energy, that you enjoy your gaming and that it can become your place that is the place to go that you love so much and the people that you love in it. Thanks again, folks. Have a super, super week. I know this is a little extra long. Thanks for being patient with me. Give me your comments and feedback, please. It's again capital R, little I, little C, capital M, capital T, little H, little E, capital G, and capital M. Rick M, the GM, on Twitter. I love the feedback. Please come friend me. I'm not going to unfriend you for any reason unless you're just cruel, and then maybe. But you have to do a lot, and I love the feedback. And thanks for subscribing. Thank you guys for being a great community. Love each and every one of you. I love getting to know you, and I hope I get to know so many of you in person and really get to be enhanced by what you bring into my life as a friend. And I hope I can do the same for you.